Hello and welcome, I'm Riz Khan. On this edition of the show, we're considering the question, is it possible to put a value on music? Could you put a price on the song which made you fall in love again, which lifted you when you were down and out, or just got you dancing through the entire summer? Well, it is possible if you're the global music industry body, the IFPI, which has revealed that total music revenues last year rose by 10% to $28.6 billion, with streaming accounting for more than two-thirds of that figure. Rising revenues have been a feature of the past decade, since streaming platforms were credited with saving the music industry from ruinous levels of piracy. But streaming has been cast as both hero and villain in the musical world, with artists often earning royalties worth just a fraction of a cent for a single play of their songs. So the mantra, streamers don't pay artists, became a common refrain when discussing the music industry. And as the biggest name in the business, Spotify often found itself as the target of such frustration. So the platform decided to try to change the narrative by revealing a wealth of data about their revenues and royalty payments, hoping this transparency would help to correct what they considered to be misunderstandings leading to unfair and inaccurate criticism. It came in the form of a report called Loud and Clear, and the company has just released its latest edition, which reveals some fascinating figures and music trends. On this show, I'm putting the spotlight on streaming through a lively and candid discussion with Brian Johnson, Spotify's head of international artist and industry partnerships. And as an artist himself, he's equipped to view the issue from both sides. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Brian, why did Spotify feel the need to produce the Loud and Clear report?
So there's been a real important conversation happening recently, and certainly over the past few years. Artists hear and read about the music industry having record growth, record profit, quarter on quarter, year on year. Well, who is actually making the money, and how does it actually make its way to artists or songwriters? Spotify wants to be part of this conversation. We want to join this conversation table and provide some information, provide some data, provide some clarity, and the all-important transparency to what is happening right now. And that's what Loud and Clear is really about. It's shedding a light on some of these difficult questions, these topics, and showing the growth over time for all levels of artists, for Spotify and for the industry as a whole.
So, all right, before we dig into the details of the latest report, how effective has it been in changing the narrative about Spotify and the streaming industry during these past 4 years?
I think it's been incredibly useful and powerful as a resource for people to take information from. We work with artists and their teams every hour, every single day, all around the world, educating, informing, and helping them get their music out to as many people as possible around the world. Now, it's very important that artists have access to this information, and Loud and Clear provides a useful resource for how streaming economics work, how the industry works, and where Spotify fits in.
All right, so talk me through some of these headlines, starting with the landmark figure in royalty payments.
Yeah, so let's start with the big figures and let's work down. So last year we paid a record some $9 billion US, and Loud and Clear works in US dollars, so I'll always refer to US dollars. $9 billion US in 2023 to rights holders. Approaching half of that, so almost 4.5 billion was accounted for by independent artists and labels. This is a first. This was not happening previously, and this points towards more diversity, more choice, more options, and I'll come back onto that.
Sorry, I was going to say, but that number is not actually what's paid to the artists, is it?
No, so this is royalties generated from artists' rights. We pay, contrary to what some people might believe, Spotify don't pay artists or songwriters directly. We actually pay the rights holders who pay artists or songwriters based on their individual agreements.
That's a huge figure to pay out. Is that why Spotify struggled to make a profit?
Well, we are focused on growing our business. We're focused on providing the most value for artists and songwriters globally. So $9 billion to rights holders last year, almost half of that to independent artists and labels. And how does this break down? So a number of artists generating different levels of thresholds. So 10,000, 100,000, 1 million. Those figures have nearly tripled since 2017. So there's huge growth over time for artists all around the world.
Now, one criticism with such big picture numbers is that it disguises the inequality of what artists earn. So is this just a relatively small number of big names enjoying the bigger piece of the pie?
No, we're seeing all levels of artists generate various thresholds. So I mentioned 10,000, 100,000, and a million. The artists generating those figures have nearly tripled since 2017. Now, I think something important to focus on here is when you think about the sort of artists who are making big amounts of money on Spotify, I think it's logical to think about those who have a song that goes viral, or those who might be top of the charts, or they're nominated for Grammy Awards or Brit Awards in the UK, or no awards in the respective territories, or those who are getting heavy airplay on the radio, featured on top playlists. That's potentially who comes to mind. Something we looked at in Loud and Clear is that there are actually over 1,000 artists that generated over 1 million on Spotify last year who didn't have a single song chart on Spotify's global top 50. Now, this is important because the gateway to creation, the gateway to distribution, the gateway to an audience is a lot broader than it used to be. I speak here as someone at Spotify, I speak as someone who spent half my career as a full-time artist as well. The opening is there for artists to come through. We're seeing more and more levels of artists succeed across different thresholds, and importantly, across different territories. Of the 66,000 artists who generated at least $10,000 on Spotify in 2023, more than half are from countries where English is not the first language. So the music industry in 2024 is more diverse. There's more and more artists coming through.
Now, Brian, you say, one of the figures you quote is number of artists earning more than $10,000 a year in royalties. As an artist, you can't really live off that kind of sum, though, can you?
So when we look at Spotify figures in isolation, we know the huge growth that we're providing to the industry and to rights holders and then onto artists and songwriters. Spotify, based on the recent IFPI information, Spotify represents almost a quarter of recorded revenue. So if you wanted to look at an artist's recorded earnings overall, you could roughly times that Spotify figure by 4 to see what that could be on a recording level. Now, it's also important to look at an artist earning a living. It's something that people talk about a lot. What we do know is the industry is growing. Spotify's paying out more and more year on year. And as I mentioned, we're approaching 25% of recorded revenue according to the IFPI. Now, there are many, many income streams that contribute towards an artist's day-to-day business. I know this firsthand. It's not just recordings and publishing. There's much more merchandise, playing shows, etc. So I believe most artists would approach their career in a broader sense and take advantage of all the opportunities in front of them. Where streaming is concerned, and Spotify in particular, we know the positive impact that we can have. It's there on Loud and Clear. We've broken it down into 10 key takeaways that people can come in and dive into. And our job really is to continue providing this information, providing the clarity for transparency, but practically building the tools, listening, understanding what the artists and their teams need to help find their audience globally, and keep developing those resources and features and best practices to help artists connect with fans all around the world in those 184 countries where we are live.
I'll get onto a couple of the points you've raised in a moment, but when I hear a million listens, I assume that's quite a lot and that the artist must be doing quite well, but that's not necessarily the case, is it? I mean, we often hear about artists moaning from their million streams, they only get paid like 50 quid, the equivalent of $65. So, when it comes to that, there's a perception gap about the reality and what's stated. And I'm wondering, what does a million listens actually mean when it comes to like kind of a real financial return?
So a million, it's an interesting figure. So we have over 600 million listeners across 184 markets. So what might have been a lot of streams a few years ago looks pretty different today based on the size of Spotify. Now, a million streams used to be a real impressive milestone. In 2023, over 329,000 songs hit that mark. And what we aim to show on Loud and Clear in one of the takeaways is how the number of annual streams needed to rank in the top 250,000 songs, 100,000 songs, 10,000 songs is changing over time. And this is very much in response to questions we receive. Loud and Clear is there as a response to questions we receive from the artist community day in, day out. And one of the most frequent questions is, how do my streams rank in terms of popularity? So the takeaway we provide on Loud and Clear is meant to shine a light on that area. And we also have a streaming numbers in context tool on Loud and Clear that artists can use to see how their songs or tracks stack up.
So, on the other end of the scale, Brian, why is Spotify no longer paying for royalties for songs under 1,000 streams?
So today, Spotify hosts well over 100 million tracks. Tens of millions of them have been streamed between 1 and 1,000 times over the past year. And on average, those tracks generated around 0.3 cent per month. What we found is that those small payments often don't actually make it to artists due to thresholds, minimum payment thresholds that the rights holders may have. But those small payments add up. They add up to around $40 million per year, which we believe could increase the payments to those emerging, those professional artists who are most dependent on streaming revenue. So starting this year, we have this new policy in place where tracks must have reached at least 1,000 streams in the previous 12 months in order to generate recorded royalties. Now, it's important to mention Spotify do not make additional money under this model. There is no change to the size of the music royalty pool that is paid out. We will simply use the tens of millions of dollars annually to increase the payments to eligible tracks.
It's interesting, in the past, the share of royalties has been largely dominated by the big labels, Sony, Universal, EMI, and Warner Music. Is that still the case?
So one of the big findings and takeaways on Loud and Clear this year is for how much of the playing field has been leveled, not just for creation and distribution, but for what route an artist takes for how they release their music. So for the first year ever, half of the revenue paid out to the music industry in 2023 was accounted for by independent artists and labels. This is a 4x increase of what indies generated on Spotify for 2017. It's another indicator of the massive shift the industry has seen as a result of streaming. Now, a very important note, independent artists typically have record deals that will give them the lion's share or favorable share from what they generate. And for the DIY sets who don't have a record deal, so those who are typically going via a distributor, paying a small fee, they will take home the majority of that copyright and the monetization from that copyright.
In talking about a change in the shift in the industry, in the past, songwriters have often been left behind in royalty payments, which seems unfair as that's often where the creative spark of a song originates. So how are the creators of songs and music faring under the streaming world?
So we spend a lot of time focusing on the songwriter and producer community, as well as the artist community. We have various initiatives where we're able to highlight and showcase songwriters' works through our Written by Playlist series. We have different studios that songwriters can use across many of our cities. And songwriter information is included in Loud and Clear. It's very important we include that. Over the last 2 years, Spotify paid out nearly $4 billion to publishing rights holders who represent songwriters. So songwriters, through these rights holders, are generating record-breaking revenues driven by streaming services. So there's more money to be shared out.
Now, you mentioned other languages a bit earlier. Now, one aspect of the report fascinated me, and that was concerning the change of proportion of music streamed in English compared with other languages. So tell me what's going on there.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite takeaways from Loud and Clear, the most recent report. Of the 66,000 artists who generated at least 10,000 on Spotify. Remember, Spotify is around a quarter of the recorded industry. So you can likely quadruple that to say more than 40,000 from recorded music last year. More than half are from countries where English is not the first language. What does this mean? Let's just dive into that. We know at this point that streaming has brought down the barriers to entry. We know that genres like K-pop is massively on the rise in the US and across different territories. Afrobeats, Amapiano are being propelled into the mainstream. We're seeing Arab pop, Moroccan pop really start to bloom and cross borders. Same with Latin music. And we are seeing that come to fruition now in terms of the royalties generated as well. The numbers have shifted and the money is going in the direction of those artists from around the world that are creating the music. This wasn't happening before streaming or even 10 years ago. The industry typically would have been dominated by artists from, I say, Anglo markets. Maybe that's where the deepest pockets in the industry were. Maybe that's where the headquarters were. But with the growing freedom of choice that fans now have access to, tastes are expanding, tastes are shifting. Fans can easily tap into like-minded communities all around the world. The world feels more interconnected in that respect. And we're seeing huge upticks for the different languages. So Spanish, German, Portuguese, French, Korean all lead the pack. And then huge upticks for Hindi, over 61% growth in 2023. Indonesian, over 58% growth in 2023. And Punjabi, over 57% growth.
I'm going to have to brush up on my South Asian music there for sure. Well, I'm speaking to you from the Middle East, where Angami and Spotify are among several streaming platforms. What are you noticing about the region's musical talent that's exciting you and your team?
Well, I think the region's super interesting. You know, we've been in the region for a few years. We're making a great start. There's still a long way to go. We know that streaming is 98% market share. And we are very focused on developing talent in the region through our Radar series. So our Radar is our emerging artist program. We have artists like Mohammed Saeed from Egypt who are involved. We have from the broader region, Tahaji is a Radar artist from Pakistan. And for us, you know, Radar is a global initiative with a local focus. So we're able to help these artists not just locally, but help them cross borders through editorial, through marketing, through promotional opportunities also.
Well, thinking about technology and how it's been developing, as we look ahead to the next Loud and Clear report, how might we see AI reflected in the streaming figures?
So throughout the history of audio, new technologies have empowered creators, pushed musical art form forward across composition and instrumentation and recording. Spotify, we were built to help artists connect with audiences. We want to help people monetize their music, their art, build careers, and that very much remains our North Star. Artificial intelligence provides unique opportunities really to further develop our key pillars of discovery, ubiquity, and connection. That said, it's very early days. It's a very, very fast moving and developing space. And I don't think we've seen anything move as fast for a while. But it's key to know that almost every business already uses AI or machine learning in some capacity. That includes Spotify. Many of our recommendations we make for our consumers are driven by machine learning or AI. And these are features such as Discover Weekly, Blend, Daylist. There's some good examples there. But also our AI DJ feature. It's not quite launched across MENA yet. We're hoping to launch that at some stage soon. But this is a personalized AI guide that knows you and your music taste so well that it can choose music to play for you. From an artist perspective, the AI DJ is able to give some context around their music to the listener. So we're seeing AI, we're seeing machine learning be used in positive ways. All that said, there are challenges, you know, and what we see in the press is a lot of conversation about generative AI in the music space. So I want to be crystal clear. Our platform rules do not allow content that infringes the intellectual property rights of others or content that impersonates others to deceive. We work super closely with our rights holder partners to enforce these rules. And fundamentally, bottom line, Spotify respects copyright.
Well, as a final thought, Brian, as an artist yourself, now working for Spotify, you could be typecast as a kind of, let's say, drummer turned gamekeeper. Do your fellow musicians give you a hard time about it?
They don't. No, they don't. It's a good question. They don't give me a hard time. They ask me a lot of questions, and it's the best field research I can ever have. I grew up as a touring, performing, recording musician. A lot of my friends are musicians, so I'm constantly surrounded by people asking me about Spotify. And it serves as a useful opportunity to understand what the business needs, what the pain points are, what we need to develop, what we're missing, what's working. It's all useful context. So I would say I am drummer turned listener and educator.
Right, Brian, thank you so much for that. Great to get some insights from both sides of the fence.
Thank you very much for having me.